Hi, and welcome to Toke Signals TV, your source for the best in cannabis and hemp news. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at TokeSignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news after we look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. We have a pretty lady who's been in flower here for just over 4 weeks. She is Strawberry Permafrost, and her genetics were obtained from Secret Seeds in Seattle. Easy to look at. Let's do the news now, shall we? In Washington state, the news isn't good for medical marijuana patients, where Governor Inslee has signed a bill basically eliminating medical marijuana dispensaries. Washington Governor Jay Inslee last Friday signed into law regulations which essentially eliminate medical marijuana dispensaries in Washington state, along with the medicinal cannabis system as we've known it since voters approved it here back in 1998. Purportedly an overhaul measure to subject medicinal cannabis to the licensing, testing, inspection, and tax requirements of the recreational side of marijuana, the bill's actual intent and effect is to get rid of the pesky medical marijuana community, which has consistently outperformed the recreational I-502 cannabis outlets with a better product and lower prices. Patients who have for years enjoyed the ability to visit medical marijuana dispensaries where the employees themselves were also facing medical challenges and had bothered to inform themselves about the medicinal applications of cannabis will now be forced into the recreational market, where the focus isn't on medicine and in fact where I-502 store employees are forbidden by law from even mentioning the medical applications of marijuana. Plant counts for patients in one fell swoop are being reduced from 15 to 6. Dried marijuana limits are similarly being slashed from 24 ounces to 3 ounces per patient. Ironically, the 15 plants 24 ounces limits were themselves compromises reached a few years ago when the best scientific studies available showed more appropriate limits would have been 71 ounces and 99 plants. Inslee line item vetoed a few parts of the bill but kept most of it, including authority for collectives of up to 4 patients to form growing cooperatives of up to 60 plants. I-502 business owners had pressured the legislature to crack down on medical marijuana dispensaries, which they characterized as dangerous and unregulated. The main problem, however, seemed to be that the medical shops were underpricing the recreational stores, often with superior marijuana. Rather than upping their own game, in other words, I-502 store owners chose to have the competition outlawed. Patients will now face tighter restrictions on medical authorizations and marijuana possession. Arrest protection is included only if patients agree to register in a state database. No other group of patients using any other medicine have such a requirement. Since local municipalities have the power to ban recreational marijuana outlets, which will be the only game in town once the last medical cannabis dispensaries are shut down by the deadline of July 2nd, 2016, some areas of the state will be marijuana deserts, lacking any safe and legal access to cannabis for patients or other customers, and that's according to Representative David Sawyer, a Democrat from Lakewood, Washington. This measure renames the Washington State Liquor Control Board to the Liquor and Cannabis Board. Cities and counties will now be allowed to reduce to 100 feet a 1,000-foot buffer zone where cannabis businesses are now prohibited around parks, libraries, and daycare centers, but buffer zones around schools and playgrounds must remain at 1,000 feet. Speaking on condition of anonymity, one Tacoma medical marijuana dispensary owner said he planned to run full tilt until the deadline comes next year. Then I'm going to retire, he told me. In the United States this week, the Marijuana Businesses Access to Banking Act was reintroduced. U.S. Representatives Ed Perlmutter from Colorado and Denny Heck from Washington State, along with a bipartisan group of 16 other Republicans and Democrats, on Wednesday reintroduced H.R. 2076, the Marijuana Businesses Access to Banking Act of 2015, to resolve the banking crisis marijuana-related businesses are facing. By updating federal banking laws and regulations to resolve conflicts between federal and state laws, the legislation allows marijuana-related businesses to access the banking system, ensuring that these businesses do not have to operate on a cash-only basis. In addition, a similar companion bill in the Senate is expected to be introduced soon. First and foremost, this is an issue of public safety, according to Representative Perlmutter. Not only are the proprietors at risk, he said, but the employees and customers are also at risk of serious and violent crimes. It is estimated that 40% of the marijuana-related businesses in Colorado are unbanked, Representative Perlmutter said. This means hundreds of millions of dollars in cash are moving around the streets of Colorado. There are now some 213 million Americans who live in the 23 states plus the District of Columbia where the voters have allowed for some use of marijuana, and it is coming to a state near you soon, he said. The federal government can't keep an eye on business practices if they are forcing them offline and underground, said Representative Heck. Forcing businesses into cash-only territory is a dangerous step away from legitimacy, transparency, and regulation, and a huge step towards crime, tax evasion, and access to minors. We've got to stop that trend, and with more states legalizing recreational or medical use of marijuana, no time is better than now to move forward with this change to the law, according to Representative Heck. Financial institutions who provide banking services to legitimate marijuana businesses are subject to criminal prosecution for aiding and abetting a federal crime and money laundering, since marijuana is still listed under Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. This legislation would remove current legal uncertainty by providing a safe harbor and additional civil protections for depository institutions who provide a financial product or service to a covered business. For example, federal banking regulators would not be able to threaten or limit a bank or credit union's deposit insurance, take any action or downgrade a loan made to a covered business, or force a depository institution to halt providing any kind of banking services to a marijuana-related legitimate business. Allowing tightly regulated marijuana businesses the ability to access the banking system significantly reduces the public safety threat, according to Representative Perlmutter's office. Also in the United States this week, more progressive legislation. Representative Blumenauer is to offer an amendment to remove restrictions preventing the Veterans Administration from recommending marijuana. When the U.S. House of Representatives this week is expected to consider the fiscal year 2016 Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill, Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon plans to offer an amendment to make it easier for qualified veterans to access medical marijuana. Now, currently, the Veterans Administration specifically prohibits its medical providers from completing forms brought by their patients, seeking recommendations or opinions regarding a veteran's participation in a state medical marijuana program. Congressman Blumenauer's amendment ensures that no funds made available to the VA can be used to implement this prohibition, which would in effect strike it down. The amendment is currently co-sponsored by Representatives Tom Reed, a Republican from New York, Sam Farr, Democrat of California, and Dana Rohrabacher, Republican of California. While there is no single approach to aiding our nation's veterans, medical marijuana is proven to help in treating post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injuries frequently suffered by veterans, according to Congressman Blumenauer. States are listening to their residents on the benefits of medical marijuana, including veterans, and are changing their laws. It's unacceptable for our wounded warriors to be forced out of the VA system to simply seek a recommendation on whether or not medical marijuana is a good treatment option, Blumenauer said. We should not be preventing access to medicine that can help them deal with these injuries to survive and thrive. I encourage my colleagues to show compassion to our veterans and pass this amendment. 36 states, the District of Columbia, and Guam have passed laws that provide for legal access to medical marijuana in one form or another. As a result, well over 1 million patients across the country, including many veterans, now use medical marijuana at the recommendation of their physician to treat conditions ranging from seizures, glaucoma, anxiety, chronic pain, and nausea. There are also 9 states in the District of Columbia that now allow physicians to recommend medical marijuana for the symptoms of PTSD due to a growing body of anecdotal evidence suggesting that marijuana offers relief when nothing else has, and it can be a more effective alternative to other and sometimes addictive prescription drugs. In New York this week, law enforcement against prohibition will be leading the Cannabis Parade in New York City on May the 2nd. You want to participate in a revolution? LEAP is leading the Cannabis Parade on Saturday, May 2nd, reports Jack Cole of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. According to Jack, the first 60 people to sign up to be part of the LEAP contingent for that parade will be given free LEAP t-shirts and badges. If you send an email or phone call or text them to Jack, that is, at the number and email given in the story on Hemp News, you can get a t-shirt size reserved for your shirt. The LEAP contingent will walk behind their In the Drug War Stop the Killing banner on Saturday. According to Mr. Cole, the marchers in their contingent will be very visible, and the backs of their t-shirts will read, "Cops say legalize drugs. Ask me why." The participating LEAP speakers will also be wearing the t-shirts and a LEAP hat, so they'll be easily referred to reporters who want interviews. Now, according to Cole, there's supposed to be more than 40 organizations participating in this New York City Cannabis Parade. At 11:30 a.m. on Saturday, the LEAP contingent will assemble for the parade at the Martinique Cafe, located on the east side of Broadway, just north of 32nd Street, across from Greeley Square Park. Participants will pick up their shirts there. The parade starts at Broadway and 32nd and proceeds to 14th Street, where there will be a rally at Union Square. "I will be the first speaker at that rally," Cole said. "A dozen LEAP supporters will have clipboards where new members can sign up by just listing their name, email, and zip code. We give everyone signing up a LEAP lapel badge." And according to Cole, when they did that at the Boston Freedom Rally last September, they got over 1,100 new members. LEAP now has well over 150,000 police, judges, prosecutors, and supporters in 120 countries, and they're looking for that million-member mark. Also in New York this week, bipartisan legislation was introduced to expedite access to medical marijuana. Patients, family members, and activists stood with legislators on Tuesday as they announced the introduction of Assembly Bill A-7060, which would direct the state to establish a program to help critically ill patients obtain emergency access to medical marijuana as soon as possible. The bill, introduced by Assembly Health Committee Chair Richard N. Gottfried and Assembly Minority Leader Brian M. Kolb, comes 298 days after Governor Cuomo signed the medical marijuana bill into law on July 5, 2014, and 9 months after the governor urged the health commissioner to do everything in his power to get medical marijuana to children suffering from life-threatening forms of epilepsy. Now, to date, let's check on their progress. Not one patient has received any medical marijuana in the state of New York, and at least 3 children who might have benefited from medical marijuana have died since the bill was passed. This bill would create emergency access to medical marijuana for patients with the most urgent needs, including children suffering from severe epilepsy, according to Chairman Gottfried of the Assembly Health Committee, sponsor of the original medical marijuana bill. Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb and I are introducing this bill to show the broad bipartisan support for emergency access, according to Gottfried. He said it's a good and compassionate public health policy. If ever there was a basis for emergency action, the suffering of these children is it, Gottfried said. Thousands of patients in New York State deal with excruciating pain each day and simply can't wait for the wheels of government to turn, according to Assembly Minority Leader Brian Kolb. Bureaucracy should not stand in the way of relief for people suffering from debilitating illnesses and diseases. Assistance is well within reach, according to Kolb. The Department of Health must be diligent in building the medical marijuana program, but that does not preclude the state from offering immediate assistance to people in dire need. The government announced in January 2014 that he was reactivating the 1980 Olivieri Medical Marijuana Research Program, and 15 months later, nothing has come of it, added Gottfried. There are New Yorkers suffering right now whose lives could be made better by access to medical marijuana. If the Department of Health does not believe it can have the 2014 Compassionate Care Act system fully up and running before 2016, the least it can do is offer emergency relief to the patients who need it most, Gottfried said. Globally this week, justice and human rights groups condemned the execution of nonviolent drug offenders by Indonesia. A number of U.S.-based and international criminal justice reform, human rights, and public health groups on Tuesday joined together to condemn the execution of nonviolent drug offenders by the Indonesian government that just took place. Wherever they occur, executions for nonviolent offenses violate human rights, a sign-on letter from the group says. Despite repeated pleas for mercy from family members, citizens, human rights organizations, the United Nations, and governments around the world, Australians Muran Sukumaran and Andrew Chan, Nigerians Martin Anderson, Rahim Agbaje Salami, Aquadil Ayanji, Sylvester Abikwe Nwolisi, Brazilian Rodrigo Galarte, and Indonesian Zainal Abidin faced a firing squad at just past midnight, Indonesia time. The offenses for which these 10 received capital punishment sentences range from transport of heroin to intent to distribute marijuana. Some were young. One was mentally ill. Others were in situations of economic necessity. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon had called on Indonesia to halt the executions. Though he said that the United Nations opposes the use of the death penalty for drug-related crimes, more than 30 countries around the world continue to use capital punishment for drug offenses, executing thousands of people every year. Indonesians should be ashamed of their government's atrocity earlier today, said Ethan Nadelman, Executive Director of the Drug Policy Alliance. The execution of these 8 people for nonviolent drug offenses will do nothing to reduce the availability of drugs in Indonesia or other countries, or protect people from drug abuse. All it demonstrates is the savagery of which governments are capable, Nadelman said. One can only hope that the 8 will not have died in vain. The protests by foreign governments and international organizations and even the UN Secretary General were unprecedented, hopefully giving not just Indonesia but also China, Iran, and other governments that execute people for nonviolent drug offenses good reason to reconsider their inhumane policies. It's worth noting, moreover, that governments kill and torture people in the name of the drug war in all sorts of ways, Nadelman said. Some, like Russia, deprive people of medications such as methadone that are approved for treatment of illicit heroin addiction. Others, including many state governments in the United States, still deny access to sterile syringes to reduce the spread of HIV/AIDS. And still others, most notably the United States, incarcerate hundreds of thousands of people for drug law violations. Hopefully the day will soon come when those who rightfully objected to Indonesia's executions will object with greater success than this time to all such executions anywhere in the world, as well as the other violations of human rights perpetrated in the name of the war on drugs, according to Nadelman. Finally this week, in Rhode Island, an encouraging poll which found a record high 57% support marijuana legalization. They want to change those state laws to regulate and tax marijuana similarly to alcohol, according to a survey conducted this month by Public Policy Polling. Only 35% were opposed to that plan. S510 H5777, which is the Marijuana Regulation, Control, and Taxation Act, would allow adults 21 and older to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana and grow 1 mature marijuana plant in an enclosed, locked space. It would create a tightly regulated system of licensed marijuana retail stores, cultivation facilities, and testing facilities, and direct the Rhode Island Department of Business Regulation to create rules regulating security, labeling, and health and safety requirements. It would also establish wholesale excise taxes at the point of transfer from the cultivation facility to a retail store, as well as a special sales tax on retail sales to consumers. From Cumberland to Narragansett, there is exceptionally strong support for ending marijuana prohibition in Rhode Island this year, said Regulate Rhode Island Director Jared Moffitt. The Marijuana Regulation, Control, and Taxation Act creates a responsible alternative that proactively controls for public health concerns while allowing adults 21 and older the freedom to legally use marijuana if they choose. Taking the marijuana market above board will create tax-paying jobs and allow the state to tax the distribution and sale of marijuana, Moffitt said. Hope you decide to join us again next week. Until then, my advice is to stay lifted. See you then.